Just No Gifts, Please, the parenting podcast by the pair with no real gifts, but a whole lot of gumption. Hey everyone, I'm Steve Noviello.
And I'm Jenny Anchondo.
Good to see you, my friend.
You too. Isn't it crazy being a parent and working and trying to keep all the things together and then having this fun little side project?
You know, it's funny, we've been talking about, so my job is expanding, your job is kind of moving around as well, and of course expanding. And some of my friends were like, are you still doing that podcast as well? Like, how are you going to fit that in?
Well, because it's our hangout time.
It is our hangout. Honestly, this is like downtime for me. You know what I mean?
Yes,
like, because
it's
we
fun.
just get to just kind of hang out. And then we are exploring the world of sports once again.
Oh.
Yes.
This is big. Okay,
Jacob
I didn't know this.
Well, he has signed up for basketball.
Okay.
Which I have to say, like, one of the kind of things that always makes me giggle a little bit about the neighborhood we live in is that nothing's ever just
like simple.
Correct. So we signed up for basketball. We're late. So like we're kind of doing more like practices and like at the games he can play if someone's absent kind of thing, which I have to navigate because I'm not driving to wherever this is.
Wait, so he's like a sub?
I guess, because they're like, well, we already picked team. I'm super late. I don't know where these moms and dads find out
late for
about
basketball?
Sign up. Yeah. I don't know where moms and dads find out about like all of there's like 1,000 different options and like, oh, we're doing this particular thing. I was like, how did you even know about that? Anyway.
Well,
so,
no, you're on the text chain though now.
Ish, yeah. And I should probably pay a little bit more attention to it. So we go to the first practice. There's two coaches. One is like Slavic and 7'6".
Okay, good.
And the other one,
I would hate for Jacob to not have a coach that was appropriate.
Right.
Good.
The other one, I am pretty sure this is what he said, but like again, me in sports, is like the assistant basketball coach at UCLA.
It's like how the kids have the local kids. Oh my gosh, what's his name? I'm just going to lose the name of the big local football star, like Deion Sanders or whatever back in the day.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, like where it's just like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Dak Prescott is going to be coaching the team this year.
Well, he's got a child. He's going to be coaching somebody's team
exactly.
in some fancy neighborhood or school.
All right. So that kind of brings us to our topic for today, which is like doing it all as a parent is hard enough. Now, we've talked before on this show, and it was an incredibly popular subject with our viewers or our listeners about
we do have two YouTube viewers, our moms,
with our kids having ADHD. But then we got questions from parents who were like, you know what? I'm the person with ADHD in my home, and how do I navigate kind of just the insanity that is, that is being a parent?
And so we actually came across the perfect guest for this. We as we do with all of our guests, we're bringing him in selfishly because we want to hear from him. But Dr. John Stevens is a psychiatrist and then the founder and director of Psych Insight and Inner Space. They are two mental health practices. They're in Houston, Texas, but we're not going to hold it against him. We love our friends in Houston. So he's triple board certified in child and adolescent psychiatry, adult psychiatry, and then obesity medicine as well. Really kind of a recognized leader in the mental health space. So he is somebody who works with people whose children have ADHD, and then also the parents as well. Dr. Stevens, thank you so much for joining us. I should also mention he has 3 school-age children himself. So we understand the sacrifice of taking the time away and coming in.
How old are your kiddos?
11, 9, and 6. So work is the sanctuary. From home, not possible for me. So I'm in the office as you see right now. So happily,
you get it.
It's easier to come to work.
Okay, so again,
it's a break.
Jenny and I both, because Heath is ADHD, right?
Which he didn't know any of this stuff until he was an adult.
Same with Doug.
And dyslexia
Same with
too.
Doug. Okay,
so
Doug's not dyslexic, but he is ADHD, which was not diagnosed until he was an adult.
How did you find out?
This
is pre you.
No, it wasn't. We were living in Dallas, and he went and took. Now, I will say, and I'll ask you this: that he went and took it was like a questionnaire kind of situation about and frankly, I mean, the questions on it's like, are you easily distracted? Do you, it was
like everybody.
I mean, if you really want the meds, you kind of know how to answer it. So how do you know if you're getting a true diagnosis? First of all, what are some things that you should be looking at in your life that go, maybe this is worth a closer look?
Well, the whole evolution of adult ADHD and the diagnosis and treatment have changed dramatically, even in the course of my career. So I've been practicing just under 20 years. And in the beginning of my career, if someone came to the office, came to the clinic, looking for a diagnosis of adult ADHD, we kind of assumed they were med seeking. They were trying to get medicines.
Okay. Yep.
So it was kind of frowned upon. But the reality is about half of the children and adolescents that are diagnosed with ADHD, and according to the Centers of Disease Control, that's nearly 10% of children, and even higher than that in the pre-adolescent and adolescent years. Those people go on to be young adults and adults with ADHD. It sometimes could look different. These are not kids running and jumping and getting in trouble sometimes for the hyperactivity, but the inattention, the procrastination, waiting to the last second for assignments, maybe a performance review, maybe it's paying the mortgage, maybe it's buying that wedding gift, the wedding anniversary gift, or those things can still persist into adulthood. The messiness, the disorganization in the car, at home, just like our kids with ADHD might be having messy book bags or lockers or desks at school.
Maybe it's waiting until the morning before you're going to the airport to get on a plane to start packing, Doug. Maybe it's that.
Doug.
Okay,
but maybe you guys are men and like you just pack 4 things. They could be.
Well, it's funny because he's so OCD about like labeling and doing and whatever. Yeah. But let me ask you this, because we get this question a lot. So we talk about, you talk about the numbers are pretty staggering when it comes to kids who've been diagnosed. What do you say to the folks who are like, listen, I think that we're overdiagnosing. Suddenly everybody has this. It's the latest thing that everybody has. Why do we see such a spike here? Is it because we know how to recognize it, or because it does kind of become this catch-all for kids who might just be spirited kids?
Yeah, I mean, I would love if the 8 to 10 million adults with ADHD listen or watch this podcast, because that would be awesome. But unfortunately, I don't even think half will. That's because half of the people that have ADHD will actually go through their entire lifetime without ever being diagnosed or treated. And even if they were diagnosed, studies show that less than a third received a prescription for their condition in the last year. So there's a little bit of this myth out there that it's kind of not real, it's overdiagnosed, it's overtreated. I see this every day in the office, whether it's with little children, whether it's with teens, whether it's with adults, and there's this stigma that doesn't really exist. Has some of the being recognized gone up? There are, these kind of quizzes you mentioned, but the reality is, despite the prevalence kind of being recognized and then being diagnosed and treated has gone up slightly since earlier in my career, many, many people are living their lives having to live with undertreated or untreated ADHD. So you talked about how to diagnose it. There are good diagnostic skills. It's generally not through some online little 8-question quiz. It's with a clinician who's recognized with, in diagnosing and treating that. Not sometimes these online 15-minute sessions where you can get a diagnosis. You saw some companies get in trouble with that during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Sloppy diagnosis, because there are some medical conditions or other conditions. We were talking a little bit before about dyslexia and other comorbid conditions that can run along with ADHD or be misattributed to ADHD. So good diagnosis is really the foundation of good treatment.
So you think we're missing a lot of people, actually? It's the opposite.
Missing a ton of people.
Okay, and what does that look like in life if you're somebody who was quote unquote missed? Say you're now a 40-year-old parent and you were missed.
That's how it happens in my office every day.
Yeah.
I'm sitting across a child and I'm going through the symptoms. We're doing the tests. Sometimes computer-based tests now are more modern to get a true norming against other boys and girls that children's age. And the parent or both parents sitting across from me are saying, well, that describes me, or usually it's saying that describes my spouse. And we actually will sometimes say, earlier in my career, I would just treat the patient in front of me. But now in my practice, there are whole families where it's grandparents, parents, children, and it's highly heritable ADHD. It's more heritable than height. So just like you're probably within an inch or so of your parents.
Wow.
Yes, it is highly genetic. So that's where some of the stigma.
So
some of the stigma that it's like weakness or stop being lazy or just stop being, I hear these things over and over. Just settle down a little bit, sit down, shut up, stop repeating, stop interrupting. Parents are saying this, not realizing it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's actually the most common one currently around.
Once they have medication, can they be expected to not be lazy and get organized?
Well, all of us can and be lazy sometimes or disorganized. Yours truly, if my wife was here, thankfully she's not, would show, examples of that. But is it causing functional impairment? Okay. I see kids, we do their IQ, it's off the chart. And yet they are getting low grades in school or getting in trouble because they're doing their homework, they're not turning it in. Or they get distracted in class, so they're deemed disruptive, especially in these first few weeks of the school year. There was the old deodorant commercial, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. If that child is being disruptive and not listening, talking too much, out of the chair, sometimes teachers will, that will ding them academically, or they'll be sent out of the class or start missing education. And that could lead to a negative spiral that really affects some children in a really catastrophic way.
Yeah, I think that these kids are kind of labeled early as being difficult. Absolutely. And then that. So let me ask you this. When we're dealing with specifically adults and adult parents who have ADHD, what does that kind of look like? So I'll tell you, so again, my husband has ADHD. He is treated for it, and we're good. But what I also do notice is it's not that he's overwhelmed quickly by things, but I am very much an extrovert, and let's get the kids involved in a whole lot of things. And
let's get the professional basketball coach.
Well, not quite, but he is more so hey, they're in enough things. It's too much. It's too many things. And I'm like, dude, they do Cub Scouts once a month. Is that one of the things that maybe if you have a spouse who has ADHD might tend to feel more overwhelmed by the idea of packing things into a calendar, even though it's not a million things, but it might seem like a million to them? Does that make sense at all?
Starting things and not finishing it is one of the symptoms of ADHD, especially in adults. So I have really a spectrum that I see in my practice. I have some people that are in a little bit of everything, but not finishing it. So that's a big complaint, usually of the spouse, that they start a project, not finish it, enroll the child, didn't get all the things that you need for the particular. Yeah. Show up to everything. So biting off more than you can chew is kind of I think the common expression. But then the other side is just difficulty getting motivated, getting that taking that first step is sometimes difficult because they know they're kind of limited bandwidth for some of these more complex multi-step tasks that sometimes require a little bit of attention on things they're not interested in, or it doesn't capture their attention. And that's a huge thing about ADHD. It's not just really attention or focus. It's really a deficit of salience. If something's really interesting to that person with ADHD, whether it be video games for kids, even adults, or other things, fantasy football or something, they'll do that for hours on end, even excluding other things. And it could be Reddit, YouTube videos, all these things. But if it's not super interesting to them, maybe that's that writing assignment, like I said, paying the mortgage, doing a performance review, updating your CV for those kind of people entering the workforce, and then they fall flat on their face. And that's when you really need to have some intervention.
That adds up. So now when you talk about, somebody knows, I'm a parent with ADHD, which it sounds like genetic component, they could be parenting a child with ADHD. What are some of the tools and resources parents need to keep in mind as they're going through their parenting journey?
Well, hopefully just using everything disposable. Usually, sometimes they're in the couples, there is that person who's kind of the peripheral executive functioning person, that organized person, hyper-organized person. Or, I have many executives, let's say with ADHD, they have that wonderful assistant or secretary or someone in their life who kind of keeps them in line. So again, using the people that can help. For that person who's overwhelmed, are there other relatives or other parents, coaches that can help you, think what's worrying you about the Cub Scouts? What's worrying you about that? Is it the carpool? Is it being late? Is it bringing everything? And kind of offloading that and allowing them to have, their unique abilities, which usually is talking. So many of my adults with ADHD are in sales in my office for whatever reason, and using those wonderful skills to their advantage, minimizing the downside, because there are a lot of wonderful things about people with ADHD. They're usually very, very bright. It's not an intelligence issue. It's oftentimes a follow-through issue, getting through that first step issue, and letting them be the best selves.
Dr. Stevens, is he Heath's therapist?
He is. And also, really did we just become our husband's assistants?
I was going to say, but
that's what I am.
You bring up an important point, though, because I think it's very interesting. You had just mentioned kind of doing it more on a granular level. Like, so for example, I'm like, hey, let's sign the kids up for whatever. And my husband might be like, that's too much. And I'd be like, okay, I like your advice here of, okay, what about it is too much? Are you concerned about transportation? Are you concerned about cost? Are you concerned about skill? Are you concerned about having to be social? Whatever the thing is, because I think that sometimes kind of identifying those things would break down maybe the reason a little bit more, make whatever the actual one thing as opposed to all of the things more manageable, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, I think you're a little bit lucky because it's contrary to type. Usually, some of the spouses I hear of people, adults with ADHD, are saying they race ahead to the shiny object or their new thing. And that's sometimes really great when it comes to innovation, when it comes to booking that trip and taking that spontaneous, ADHD people can be super spontaneous, super extroverted. It's like, okay, we're going to do that party. We're going to do that anniversary party. But there's like, did you get the food? Do we have the venue? Did you ask people about the date? Because that's a holiday. Those are the things that I hear. And it's so maddening for the significant other spouses to kind of catch up to that kind of whirling ADHD, brain. So you're almost lucky.
It's funny. So we're planning this party actually, my husband is planning a party for my 50th, and it's actually been a real exercise in me not being like, because I'm like, hey,
you can't be his administrative assistant.
We have to send those invitations out.
They did go out, by the way. Did you say, please copy me?
So secretly, my friends that are doing this as well, I was like, could you make me an admin on this invitation? Because there's a lot of it went out and it didn't get delivered. And I was like, I know that you're not going to
Next guest is going to address control issues. Okay, that's interesting though. But he is following through. So far. You're following through. Yeah. Okay. Well, Dr. Stevens, how can everybody find you, get in touch with you, take advantage of your services, book you, that sort of thing?
Oh, just putting my name, johnstevensmd.com, our website. You could book now. We see a lot of people with ADHD. I have a wonderful assistant who, once the appointment is made, reminds them, emails them, emails or calls the day before, 5 minutes into the session because you're not here. So sometimes this still happens all the time, even in our practice, and we live with it. But there's a lot of wonderful things. There are tons of treatments out there for ADHD, both medication, non-pharmacologic. And like I said, it's very, very treatable. If you're concerned about your spouse, I guess was coming out of today's talk, refer them. And, it's a great conversation because it affects, like I said, 8 to 10 million American adults, along with 6 million children, and, woefully underrecognized in law.
So we just want to say a quick thank you to you. Really good information. And I'm sitting here laughing because I think you and I are, we're both very type A. We're both very get it done. I don't know if you had that experience with Heath where you're like, okay, you do this, and then you're kind of like, oh, I can't help myself.
It's interesting. I think it's a spectrum. You guys have been married longer than we have. Yeah. And I truly think, even though we've been married for 8 years, I think we're still getting to know one another. And I think it's still
so funny. It seems like so much longer that you've been married.
Yeah. Well, and we had Brighton right away.
Right.
So it's like we weren't together as single entities for that long. And sometimes, somebody does put forward their representative for like the first however long, right? Like we were already married by the time it was still,
by the time the jig was up.
We were both putting forward our representative. So sometimes I'm like, I'll think like, well, no, he does it this way. And I'm like, wait, no, that was only what he did like the first year or two. This is your new normal. Or, so there's there's a vacillation between, I'm just observing it. Like what is he's VP travel. But then as of late, I've been booking the travel. Yeah. So I'm like, are you still VP travel? Or what happened?
Well, and that's also,
or are we taking over? Like, that's the thing too. Like,
exactly.
Was it that I said, hey, we have a trip booked, and when he didn't book it within 5 minutes, I went and booked it myself. Right. Like, am I giving him the space to do the thing that he was planning to do?
Yeah, I have difficulty with that too. We just booked spring break, and he's like, hey, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, we can do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, okay. And in that moment, I had a moment, because he can be busier than me sometimes. I had a moment to go check, and it's like, oh gosh, this stuff is really booking up. Like, I'm on the phone right now. They have 2 rooms left. Like, we need to pull the trigger or not, kind of thing. But I will say that we were talking about kind of like understanding the additional leeway that you have to give a spouse, just like you would a child sometimes. And I now laugh at things that used to drive me nuts. Like, I can come home to the house and see, after Doug's been there alone, this is really more pre-kids, and like see like the beginnings of projects, and like in my mind be like, oh, he was doing this when he got distracted by this, and then he was doing this, and then he got distracted by, and it's like this like treasure map of like his like neuropaths for the day, which now I find like funny. But interestingly, he also, like, I was just away with friends. I came home and I was like, how did you get so much accomplished while I was gone? And you had the 2 kids, like silly things, like you cleaned out the pantry, you changed the light bulb, like you
cleaned out the pantry.
Does Heath not do that?
That is hilarious. He does a lot, but like it's not the pantry. And honestly, neither do I. So I'm not pointing any fingers.
Topics for a new day.
Yeah,
hey, we want to wrap it up because we want to keep it on time. We appreciate you. I'm going to remind you that you can find a new episode of our podcast every Tuesday morning on your favorite podcast platform. And as we always like to say around here, if you do nothing else today, go find yourself a friend you don't need to clean the house for. We'll see you soon. Is he not clean?